Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show, and every week I get to talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies and organizations, ranging from Netflix to Kinko's to YPO, EO, Activation, Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Axe Software, and many more. Most of the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. My guest this week is Evan Nierman. He's the founder and CEO of Banyan. It's an international crisis management and public relations firm out of Washington, D.C. Evan and his team has provided counsel to a wide group of different celebrities, political leaders, corporate, private clients, CEOs, help them navigate all kinds of sticky situations, we'll put it. And we're going to get into that in a second. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Crisis Averted, PR Strategies to Protect Your Reputation and the Bottom Line. And of course, this is brought to you by Rise 25 Media, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. And if you're listening to this and you've ever thought about doing a podcast, I say absolutely, you got to do it. One of the best things you'll ever do. I love doing podcasts on either side of the microphone. You can email us at support@Rise25Media or go to rise25media.com to learn more about it. And Evan, so excited to have you here. And we're going to talk about media and how you get attention in today's noisy landscape. But first, I want to start with, you were involved in debate prep in one of the presidential cycles. And you got to see a little bit about what the political leaders are like, not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera. And probably, the top question I've gotten in the last 20 years has been, what was Bill Clinton like? Because I worked in the Clinton White House and people ask me, what was Bill Clinton like? And they want to know about his charisma and stuff like that. And,
John, what was he like?
You're being interviewed, not me, my friend. We'll get into that.
Fair enough.
So we'll start with you. But first of all, what was that experience like? Everyone sees these presidential debates, high stakes types of situation. But what was it like behind the scenes preparing?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say it's good to talk with you again. It's great to be a host on this podcast, which I'm a big fan of. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Look, the opportunity to do debate prep for presidential candidate was fascinating. It was a chance to step behind the curtain and see, when we tune in to the televised debates, we see these polished people on stage with literally, tens or hundreds of millions of eyeballs on them. And the thing that was really interesting for me was to see the extent to which so much of what the candidate is going to say is worked out well in advance of the debate itself and before it even happens. And so part of the preparation, yes, it was exploring the policies and making sure that the candidate could speak articulately and knowledgeably about different policy positions. And yet, where we spent the bulk of the time with that debate preparation was actually communications, how to say it. And, if candidate X were to attack,
says this, yeah,
what's the rebuttal?
Yeah.
If this person comes at you, how are you going to turn it around? What are a few quippy things that you can say in the areas where you expect to be criticized by your competitors?
Yeah.
So
having
it was a
zinger responded. Yeah.
Those zingers, nine times out of 10, those things are not quippy, off the cuff remarks. Sometimes they are, and a lot of times they are not. They're scripted in advance. And actually, you can really tell oftentimes if someone's they've got the zinger all ready to go, and they're just waiting for the right opportunity.
Sometimes it goes worse
when they do it badly.
Right. Sometimes it's worse. You can tell they're like waiting to use it, and then they're like, oh. They're trying to do Reagan was famous for there you go again when 1980, I think it was, when he was running against Carter and Carter was explaining something in his wonky style and Reagan said, there you go again. And that's kind of been one of those zingers that people want to have, but they try a little too hard to get.
Yeah. And if people see you trying too hard, it does take away the sting from the zing.
Yeah.
But I think, unfortunately, while I'm a big believer in the power of communications, and I think communications is really at the root of nearly every both crisis and every opportunity, I do think within the country right now, in terms of the political climate, people are looking too much at the pageantry and the drama and the stuff when we really need to get back to substance, which I hope will happen. And
but it's so hard these days with our attention span, and everything's a tweet. And, even in the presidential debates, it used to be you had a couple of minutes to answer these questions. And part of the reason that people, script these answers is because it's really hard to answer something in 60 seconds. You don't have that much time to answer a question. And if you want to make sure you get all of your, succinct thought in there, which I'm attempting to do right now, and I'm taking 2 minutes to say it, right? I mean, it's hard to say something in a succinct amount of time.
It is. And that just underscores why preparation is so key, and why you need, not just me personally, but people like me or political consultants, communicators to come in and really help you take what can be a very complex argument or complex policy provision and dumb it down, if you will, and make it something that you can talk about in a short, succinct, memorable way.
Right. Talk a little bit about some of the different work that you do. You work with CEOs, you work with celebrities, you work with publicly traded companies, and you do crisis PR. Well, first of all, let's start with, what is that? There's been TV shows about this sort of thing, but I think, people would love to hear from you what your vision is of it.
Yeah, I think I get two questions about when it comes to crisis PR and what they've seen in Hollywood. And the first is, are you the male version of Olivia Pope from that show Scandal, which I think was on ABC?
Yeah.
And the answer is no. Kerry Washington is far more talented and looks much more amazing than I ever would in a million years. And I've never slept with a president. I don't think she has, but her character has in the show. No one's ever staggered into my office covered in blood and said, "Help, I'm in a crisis. I need you to get me out." And the press is outside. It's not really quite that
TV.
Dramatic.
Yeah,
it's not quite that dramatic. And then the other one, and someone actually introduced me to someone recently at an event, and they said, "Oh, he's a crisis management guy. He's like Ray Donovan." And at the time, I just kind of nodded along because I hadn't seen Ray Donovan. I was like, I presume that's a compliment, but I don't know. And I went home that night and I downloaded the first season and I watched. And he's a fixer, but this is Liev Schreiber in Hollywood. And he's, when he has problems, he takes a baseball bat and he beats people and breaks into their apartments and buries evidence and does all sorts of illegal things. So just the record, that is not what we do. That is not crisis PR. That is way sexier and more interesting, but also a little divorced from reality, at least my reality.
There was a George Clooney movie also that was about a fixer. Like, I think it was an attorney.
Michael Clayton.
Michael Clayton. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. That one, there were some aspects to Michael Clayton that I think are true to life. And there are some that are also, very dramatic for Hollywood. I do talk about another fixer in my book, which is, a lesser known individual. He plays kind of a small part in the movie Pulp Fiction, and that's Winston Wolfe, who's played by Harvey Keitel. And I use him actually as an example. Right? The Wolf, you got it. So I use the example of the Wolf as someone who does a good job and shows crisis management done well. And so when you ask what the heck does a crisis management person do? What is crisis PR? Well, in Pulp Fiction, for those of you who aren't familiar with the movie, Where Have You Been Living? It's one of the best movies of all time. Right. Winston Wolfe fields a phone call and two guys are in a situation. They killed somebody. The dead body's in the trunk. They've parked it in the guy's garage and they have to get the car cleaned up and get the body out of there before the wife comes home. Otherwise, there's going to be a hell to pay and she's going to be very upset and the guy's going to get divorced. So the Wolf comes in, he acts immediately. He fields the phone call, so he's available, and that's one of the things that a crisis manager has to do, is be available at all times. And one of the unwritten rules is that a crisis happens, it just is that it happens at the worst possible times. So
Right.
if I know I'm going out of town on a family vacation, that's probably when we're going to get a phone call. Yeah, it's just a given.
Yeah.
So in the movie, the guy's, not available at the time. He's wearing a tuxedo. He's at some event, but you know what? He drops everything and gets there, which is also what you have to do when you're in crisis management. You're moving at the speed of the news cycle, and you're moving at the speed of events. And so you got to be willing to go fast.
Right.
And then he solves the problem quickly and assertively. He's decisive, he's strategic. And I think that that's also what you have to do when you parachute in to help either an individual or an organization, and they're finding themselves under fire, they're in a tough spot. It's your job as the crisis manager to really guide them. And many times this could be a bet the farm kind of situation, where if it's handled the wrong way, the company could see its stock price go down. They could see a rebellion among its employees. They could lose their customers. It can be legal repercussions. It can be lawsuits coming. And so it's really important that the advice they're getting from their crisis manager is good advice that will help mitigate their risk and move them through the situation.
I'm really glad you compared what you do to the wolf and not the gimp in that situation. So, although maybe sometimes you feel like the gimp. I want to ask you about.
I'm not going there. You're taking this interview in a very, very edgy arena, so I'm just gonna listen.
Just encourage for those like you said you hadn't seen Ray Donovan, which I haven't either. But for those who haven't seen Pulp Fiction, you're gonna have to go see that in order to get that reference. But one of the challenges for you is just being contacted late, right? Like you said, just yesterday you got a call, kind of a crazy situation from a company, which with a couple of hours notice, which doesn't give you a lot of time to help with preparation. So talk about that type of scenario.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. Crisis management, crisis PR support is a little bit like insurance. People don't want to pay for it and they don't want to spend the money, but those who do are damn glad they paid it when they need it. And what happened yesterday has happened actually many times before, and that was our phone rings. Someone tells us they need our help. They start explaining the situation. And in this case, it was a nonprofit organization that had taken money from donors and from other sources, and they're accountable. They have a fiduciary responsibility for those funds. And the situation they were facing was that someone in a very high level at the organization was misappropriating those funds and treating the nonprofit's accounts like his own slush funds or his own piggy bank. And so when we hung up the phone around 2:30 in the afternoon, they were serving papers to that individual at 5:00 p.m., letting him know that he was terminated. And so it was important for the board of directors to act speedily and to rely on us to guide them through this situation. And, look, that's not a lot of turnaround time. And you got a lot of audiences that you have to be preparing to speak to when something like that happens. So you've got donors who've given to the organization because you don't want them to get the wrong idea that the organization has done something wrong as a group as opposed to one individual. You don't want them to think that the money that they've given has been misused. You've got to rally the internal audience, which is the staff. It's a very traumatic thing when a high-level executive gets removed. And so they needed a way to message that to the team and to bring unity to the team as opposed to sowing confusion or fear. They obviously needed to have a plan in place in case the press became interested in this. And they needed internal communication among board members, and they needed to be individually prepared for what to do if they got questions, whether it's from donors or the press, et cetera. So there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of parts. And with regular PR, your goal is ultimately to help an organization accomplish its goals. And then over a sustained period, you want to use communication to do that. Well, crisis PR is like regular PR on steroids with super high stakes and zero margin for error and a fraction of the amount of time to turn things around and to be decisive and to be successful. And that is a difference. Most firms purport to do crisis communications, most don't, or if they do it, they're dabbling in it and they don't do it well. And that really underscores the difference between crisis PR versus regular PR. For those who are kind of wondering what is, crisis PR. Crisis PR is a niche area of communications, of strategic communications and PR. And it's one that's very specialized.
Yeah. And I imagine kind of fun in that sense that, it's exciting, there's high stakes, but from a business perspective, perhaps more challenging. And I've talked to others who have, businesses like this where it's more challenging to build something that's more predictable, more stable, which you want from a business perspective. If you have something where people just kind of want it and they need it urgently.
Absolutely. And it can be. And I saw that actually, I started Red Banyan because I'd had the opportunity to work at a crisis PR firm in the past. And I'd worked there about 3 years before I started Red Banyan. And at the time I was at that other firm, I saw that firm's approach and how they did business. And one of the big challenges, as you pointed out correctly, is when you're only doing crisis communications, it's many times feast or famine. And you'll get really, really busy with a client engagement and a matter. And then the irony is, if you do a great job for the client,
Goes
you
away.
get yourself out of work.
Yep.
Yeah. So, hey, great. I solved your problem in 2 days. Now that person doesn't have to pay us anymore.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a catch-22. But the difference is I knew the reason I had to start my own firm was I'd seen what that firm did and how it operated and how it treated clients. And it treated clients in a very transactional manner. The idea was charge as much as you can, bill them as fast and aggressive as you can, and maximize your profits. And then to hell with them. If the relationship falls apart, well, we got paid for our work. If it ends up in litigation or arbitration or acrimony, oh, well, that just happens. And that was that firm's approach. And I didn't last very long at that firm because what was going through my head at the time was, imagine if we treated the clients like they were our family members or our friends, and we cultivated a relationship with them. And we took them through the crisis and we did right by them and we did good work and we got paid fairly for the specialized service that we provided, but we ended on great terms. Wouldn't it be good that we solved their problem? It stands to reason if they have an issue down the road, they'll come back to us.
Yeah.
Or they'll spread word among their friends or their contacts. Hey, these guys got me out of a jam. They're really good. They're great to work with. They bill very fairly. And so I was thinking to myself, well, rather than having a client where you make as much money as fast as possible, but you don't treat them right, what if you kept that client instead of 2 months, keep them for 10 years? And so that's really what I set out to do with Red Banyan. In the early days, I had a lot of trouble with what you're describing, which is the uncertainty, the ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
And what I quickly found was it wasn't enough as a fledgling agency for us to do only crisis comms. And so we needed to do both crisis communications, but then we also needed to do ongoing strategic communications, positive PR, and we needed to do both. And by building up our roster of retainer clients, folks, organizations for whom we were working on an ongoing basis with a fixed scope of work, that provided steady, predictable revenue. And then when the crises came in, it's almost like that was the gravy on top, but the business was really focused upon building the book of recurring revenue from positive PR.
And you mentioned the positive PR, and you've been able in some instances to turn a negative situation into a positive situation. So you've done some work, your company's done some work for the U.S. Holocaust Museum, which is amazing. My business partner, Jeremy, grandfather's a Holocaust survivor, very impactful on his life, obviously. The Florida Holocaust Museum also had a situation where the side of the building got tagged with swastikas. And I can imagine, the museum directors coming out and just wanting to just cover that up or just clean it up as soon as possible. But you took a different tact and it ended up turning into a positive. So talk about how you did that.
Yeah, that's right. And what people need to understand about crisis is in the moment, it's very painful. It can be very disorienting. But the flip side of that crisis is opportunity. And so if you've got someone helping you along the way and guiding you the right way, you can actually take a negative and turn it into a positive. And so with the Florida Holocaust Museum, as you pointed out, they were tagged swastikas on the building, and it could have been something that happened and went away quickly. But instead, it was really important, I felt, to use it as a teaching moment, as a chance to bring the community together. And so it's really,
let me interrupt you on that real quickly. What was that conversation like? So you get a call from the Florida Holocaust Museum. They say this happened, and they're like, we're cleaning it up as it is. And you're like, stop. I mean, that must have been a hard conversation for them. Like, they must have, I can imagine that they were like, what you want to call the press? Like, we don't want to highlight this. This is deeply painful and personal to us. How do you convince them that you can turn it into a positive?
Well, it's a good thing for the museum. The chairman of the board is a guy named Mike Eagle, and he's young, he's whip smart, he's an attorney, he's a great businessman, and he has an understanding of both politics and the media. And so when Mike called me in the morning, he called me at 7:00 in the morning or something and said, we've been tagged. This has already happened. And actually, I didn't tell them, wait, stop cleaning it up. You know why? Because they had already cleaned it up,
wow.
Ironically. And so what I was really asking Mike was, did we get photos of it? Do we have images of it? Because we needed those. There had to be some evidence of it. We needed to share that. And honestly, the pictures that we had were not great. They weren't high quality. They weren't really staged the way that you would, when I say staged, I don't mean that they were fabricated or anything.
Right.
I mean, they weren't lined up where you could see everything in one frame. They just were bad pictures. And obviously the content makes them horrible as is. The conversation with Mike, who's the chairman of the board, was, this is a terrible thing, but we're gonna use this to the museum's advantage, because this shows how critically important your commitment to education, Holocaust education, is. And it shows that the threats and the hatred and the anti-Semitism that led to the Holocaust haven't been eradicated, and that still exists today. And it continues to be something that our society needs to be aware of. And part of the way that we're going to make them aware is, this incident, we're going to turn this into national news because it's important. And he said, okay, I trust you. I don't know how you're going to do that, but we're here to support you in whatever we can do. Do it, please help us. We don't know what to do. And they ultimately used it as an opportunity to really bring the community together in Tampa, St. Pete. So they held an event less than a week after the incident, and they had a community gathering, and they had Christian, Muslim, Jewish, LGBTQ, white, Black, Asian. They brought representatives from a diverse community all together to stand against hate. And it became an event that was both, when the incident happened itself, it became national news, and it was covered by Fox and CNN and a range of other outlets. And guess what? A week later, when the community all came together to stand against hate, it became national news again. And Mike, actually, who's a third generation, his grandparents were Holocaust survivors. He published a very thoughtful op-ed that ran on CNN.com that talked about the lessons of what had happened there and what the community should learn from this and what the takeaway is. And for me, it's a really great illustration that a crisis doesn't need to be something that has a permanent stain or creates a permanent stain, something that you need to run from and you need to hide from. If you take it head on and you deal with it in a proper manner, you can actually turn it to your advantage and use it as a unifying force.
Yeah. Wow. What a great story. Thank you for sharing that. We're running a little short on time, but I do want to ask about the changing media landscape and how that's affected your work and affected communications in general, PR, crisis communications. You've been doing this a while. We're recording this for a podcast, which is a new media tool. There's social media. How does that affect and change the world of communication today?
Great question. Every couple of years, the world of communications completely reinvents itself. And that's part of why I find it to be such a fascinating and interesting line of work. Is there's new platforms that come online every day, and you have to be nimble and you have to be a lifelong learner and willing to adapt, because you got to meet reporters where they are. You got to connect with media wherever that is. And so it's one of the things that I think makes this one of the most fascinating arenas in which to play. And so every day I wake up excited, and you just have to be willing to adapt quickly, because the old way falls away fast.
Yeah, it's crazy. I was listening to CNN has a podcast about the 2003 recall campaign, which I was on the losing end of because I was working for the governor who lost on that one. But they were talking about how radical it was at the time that Arnold Schwarzenegger announced he was running for governor on The Tonight Show. And now these days it's done via tweet. It's done via YouTube video. Maybe it's done on Twitch. There's so many different ways that people are communicating.
It's amazing. And now there's never been a better time to get your message out. The biggest challenge now is how to break through the noise. It's not how to amplify, because what's amazing is every single one of us is walking around with a global amplifier. We have these devices called smartphones in our pockets. And with a couple of thumb taps and swipes, you can broadcast your message to the world. And that's a remarkable thing. It's totally changed the way that people get their information, how they both absorb information and also how they push out information. And it's changed the landscape of everything from politics to media to social connectivity. And it's amazing. It's fraught with risk and opportunity.
Yeah. It's a fascinating world that it's in. Well, I want to wrap things up with the last question I ask. I'm a big fan of gratitude. So if you look around at your peers and contemporaries, others maybe in your industry, others who you would admire, however you want to define it, who do you respect? Who do you admire that's doing good work out there these days?
Yeah, so your question comes at a really appropriate time, because just a couple of hours ago, I was at lunch with Vern Harnish, who's a serial entrepreneur, a brilliant guy, and he's the founder, the creator of an organization called EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. And the EO was created to give entrepreneurs and business owners a safe space where they could come together, that they could help each other, and that they would know that they had a support system in place. And I walked up to Vern at one of the breaks. He gave two really great presentations. I walked up to him in between, and gratitude was on my mind. And I said, I wanted to thank you, because I've been affiliated with EO for the past 9 years. And in addition to meeting and marrying my wife, having my kids, joining EO and being a part of this network, it has been one of those transformative events in my life. And I've met some of the most amazing people. I've been able to grow spiritually. My depth of knowledge for business has grown exponentially. And it's just been a life-changing experience. And so, Vern, I just wanted to say thank you to you for creating this. And it's given me so much.
That's
and the person who was standing next to me said, "Oh, I'll bet you've never heard that one." He said, "You know what? I hear it all the time, but it never gets old."
That's great. Yeah. Crisis Averted, PR strategies to protect your reputation and the bottom line. Evan, where can people go to grab the book and learn about you and Red Banyan?
Yes, you can get the book on Amazon.com. You can download it on Audible. You can find it anywhere books are sold: Target, Walmart, Barnes and Noble. If you want more information about me, you can connect with me at evannierman.com. You can check out redbanyan.com, which is my company, and all of our social media is linked to. It's linked from the redbanyan.com. And if you reach out to me and drop me a line, I'd love to connect with you. And I do read my email. I do respond, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Excellent. Evan, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
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 And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.